So we need a main entry widget for our app. And for this app, I'd like to get started with this categories screen, where we can then select a category and see all the meals that belong to that category. And therefore, I'll add a new file here in this project's lib folder, which I'll name categories.dart, because in there, I want to build the widget that displays all these categories. Now, inside of categories.dart, you should therefore create a new class, the categories screen class. For example, the name is up to you, and you could also just name it categories, but since this will act as a screen in this app, and we will later have multiple screens, but also some regular widgets which don't act as screens, I want to mark the widgets that will act as screens. So therefore this one is the categories screen, and we of course extend stateless or stateful widget here, and here we'll only need a stateless widget because indeed there won't be any internal state that would need to be managed in that widget. Sure, we'll be able to select a category later, but as you will see, the navigation to the screen that shows all the meals for the category will not be handled with state, but instead with a different mechanism. And therefore this indeed can and should be a stateless widget. Now of course, as always, we need the build method, and we should add a constructor function here. Categories screen is a fitting name, where we should accept and forward the key property as always. And here in the build method, I want to return the scaffold widget because I want to have that default styling that it applies. I want to be able to add the app bar at the top and so on. And in general, it's very likely in Flutter that if you're building a multi-screen app, that every screen will use the scaffold widget to do its base screen setup, because, for example, the app bar often differs between different screens. Different screens might have different titles or buttons in the app bar, and therefore being able to set the app bar or other screen-specific settings right from inside the screen widget is a common requirement, and hence it is quite common to set up the scaffold widget inside of the screen widget, as we're doing it here. So here I will indeed add the app bar parameter and set this to app bar. So I'm using the built-in app bar widget again, as we did it before in the course. And on that app bar, I'll set the title parameter to the text widget and output some text as a title in this app bar. And the text here could be pick your category or anything like that. Now we can also add const here since this is a constant widget, but of course that's not all I want to do in this scaffold here. Instead, we also want to set the body. And the body, as you learned before, is the main page content. Now here for the body, I want to output all these different categories, which then later can be selected to move to one of those categories. And for this app here, I plan to lay out these categories as a grid. And thankfully, creating such a grid is also quite straightforward in Flutter, because it does not just offer a list view for rendering a list, but also a grid view for, you guessed it, rendering a grid of items. And here, just as with the list view, you also have a builder constructor function, which would allow you to build the grid dynamically if you had a potentially very long list of grid items. But alternatively, you can also instantiate the grid view widget like this to not get this possible performance optimization of only rendering what's visible. But here I won't have that many categories, so that performance optimization wouldn't really kick in anyways. And therefore I'll use this approach where I can directly set my children, so the items that should be displayed in the grid. Now, GridView also needs something else. As you can see in this error, it needs a grid delegate, which should be set. And therefore, besides setting the children, which we will soon do, you also must add the grid delegate parameter here. And this is a parameter which might sound quite strange, but in the end, if you hover over it, you learn that this in the end simply controls the layout of the grid view items. And here I'll create a grid with this sliver grid delegate with fixed cross-axis count option, which is a very complex way of saying that I can in the end set the number of columns which I want to have here. So here I can set my cross-axis count to 2. And since by default the grid view main axis is from top to bottom, the cross-axis is from left to right. So if I set this to 2, I get 2 columns next to each other. So horizontally I have these 2 columns. Now with that set here, we can also set a child aspect ratio, which will impact the sizing of those grid view items. And here I'll set this to 3 divided by 2 to in the end dynamically derive a 3:2 ratio. Alternatively, you could also manually set this to 1.5. I'm just using this notation to make it clear that this in the end is the aspect ratio which I want to have. And I'll also set a cross-axis spacing of 20 to have some spacing between the columns. And a main axis spacing of 20 as well, so that I have a spacing of 20 pixels horizontally between my items and vertically between my grid items. And this can then also be turned into a const object. So that's the grid configuration. Now we can add our grid items here. And I'll add the actual data soon enough. For the moment, just to see whether it works, I'll just add a bunch of dummy text widgets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe 6. We can add const here to see whether this grid is displayed as intended. So with that all set up, we can use our categories screen in the main Dart file here as a value for home, where we can now use categories screen like this and actually add const in front of it. And of course, also make sure that you added the import to the categories Dart file. With that added and this set here, you can save this. And if you then run the app on an emulator, as we did it many times before in the course, you should see a screen that looks something like this. And of course, the text is not super readable here. So let me quickly fix this, even though this is just a temporary placeholder and will soon be removed anyways. But here I'll quickly add the style parameter to my text items to set some color and manually set this to color as white, because again, this will be gone soon anyways. And then we can copy this to all these text widgets here, just so to make sure that the text is a bit easier to see. And we can indeed see that we now got this grid. The styling definitely isn't finished, but we can see the 2-column layout along which the different grid items are positioned. So that's good. Now it's time for the actual category data.